welcome to our tutorial. So in this tutorial we're going to make a door. So it's going to bring over a picture here. So not exactly this, but something like this. So ours may, we're going to try and use some mirroring to show you some of those tools. So we may have a bit more symmetry in our door than this one, but I'm going to make something a little bit like this. So let's get started. So here we are in Blender, and this is our generic cube. So I'm just going to turn on my shortcuts here so you can see what I'm doing. I'll just place that down here so you can see when I press some keys. Okay, so I want to start with our base cube, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a bit smaller. I'm going to make it I'm going to scale it down. So I'm going to press S and then 0.25 and then enter. So now it's quarter the size it used to be. I'm going to press full stop on my numpad, and that kind of centers me on the selected object. Now it's still a square, but I want to make it half the width on this red line here on the x-axis. So I'm going to press S, X 0.5 and then enter. And that's going to be kind of my starting point for the door. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it on this, you can't see the blue axis, but I'm going to scale it upwards, so SZ2. So what we have here in my mind, it probably just looks like a cube to you, is kind of a quarter of the door. So let's go have a look at how we're going to mirror this. So in Blender, you've got over here you've got a properties window. So this is my outliner where I get to see what's in my scene. So I'm going to double click here and call this door. And over here I have the properties of this object here. So these are the colors and any other properties I want to assign to it. This little spanner here is the modifiers tab, and at the moment there are no modifiers. And the one I want to use is this one here, mirror. So I'll come back to that in a minute. I'm just going to have a little chat about how it works. So this orange dot here, where my mouse is the origin of this object. So if I press OR to rotate, that's what I rotate around. If I were to move that to where my mouse is now, then the whole object would rotate around that point. So what we want to do is we want to place the origin up here on this line so that we can mirror around the origin. So mirroring is relative to where this point is in an object. So I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'm going to left click on this vertex and shift left click on that vertex. So I've selected two of them, and now I want this red and white circle, this cursor, to appear in between the two of these, and that's called snapping. So I'm going to press Shift S and I get a menu, and I want my cursor to go to what I have selected, and now it's popped up here. So now I'm going to go back out to object mode, because I can't move the origin of the object in edit mode. I can only move it in object mode. So now I'm going to go to the object menu, set origin, and the origin is going to go to the 3D cursor. So now when I press OR, I rotate around that object, or that point in the object. So now I'm going to use my mirror modifier. So I'm going to go add modifier, mirror. Now I've pressed mirror modifier and very little has happened. So I'm going to press Y here and and Z. I'm going to turn off X. So if we have a little look at this in wireframe mode, we can see that it's actually, so this quarter here has been duplicated across the x-axis, and it has also, actually I tell a lie there, it's not the x-axis, so it's the vertical axis, which is Z, and it's also been duplicated top and bottom, which is this y-axis here, in that direction. So it's been duplicated up and across. So I'm going to press Z again and go back to solid mode. Now what we have here is, so anything I make in this bottom corner here will be duplicated across the rest of the door. So let's use that to our advantage. So again, I'm going to press go to edit mode. And what I want to do is I want to kind of cut in some panels. So I'm going to click up here on this little icon here. This is face select. And I'm going to click on my object here, on my face. Now I can select any face I want. And as with all tools in Blender, I can hold down the Shift key and select multiple faces. But let's just start with one for now. So I want to duplicate this face, or I want to extrude a new face out of it, make new geometry. So I'm going to press the E key. So I've extruded. And now I'm going to press escape. So basically I've made new geometry, but I've placed it on top of itself, which is not very productive, but it allows us to do this. I can press S.8, enter. So I now have isolated this area here, and now I can go E, and I can just move my mouse and sink this in. So I just moved it by eye. I didn't type in a particular distance, so I pressed E and I moved the mouse and then I left clicked. And now I'm going to press S for scale and just scale it in a little bit. So now we've got a pattern on our door, and I've just gone back into object mode here so we can have a quick look at it. So that's not too bad. That's quite simple. So let's see if we can make it a little more interesting. So in the original image we looked at, which was this one here, it had sort of vertical lines to kind of suggest it's made from wood. So let's see if we can do that. So with the door selected, I'm going to go back into edit mode. And what I want to do now is I want to try and cut some grooves into this panel. So there's a couple of ways I can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press with the mouse over this panel here, or this face. I'm going to press Control or. And when I move the mouse, we get what are called loop cuts. Now I'm going to click here. Actually, before I click, I'm going to use the middle mouse wheel to increase the number of cuts I have. So, and it should tell me. Oh, actually, no, I don't have that open. So I should be able to roll this and it'll tell me how many cuts I have. So I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I've clicked once, I can still move it, and I'm just going to right click to end the function, and I've got all of this extra geometry. So now what I can do, I can go back to face select mode. I can select that face, hold down the Shift key, and select those 4, and then press E for extrude, and move them in a little bit. And now we've got this kind of vertical pattern. Okay, which is not identical to what was on the original door, but that's fine. So now I'm going to go back to my object mode, and over here with the mirror modifier, I'm just going to turn it off. So I'm going to turn these 3 off here. And one thing I have that I don't want is I have what's referred to as internal geometry. So this face here shouldn't exist, because the other if we refer to this as a quarter of the door, the other quarters all have faces here too. So we've got geometry on top of itself. So I'm going to go back into edit mode. I'm going to select all of these faces here. I have the Shift key held down, and I'm just clicking on the mouse. So all of those ones, and now I want to delete them. So I'm going to press X for delete, and I can select what I want to delete, a vertex, an edge, or a face. So I'm going to select faces. And now they are all gone. We can see inside this. But when I turn this back on, it doesn't make any difference to the structure of our door. It just means that we don't have these extra faces on the inside. running across the inside of the door. And actually, when we go to render that, when we try and make a picture out of it, we'd actually get some errors. So again, I'm going to go back to object mode. Now, I think my door is still a little bit too thick. So let's half the width of it again. So we'll press SX 0.5. And everything has got slightly narrower on this x-axis, but I think that's fine. It looks better. So now, what we want to do is we're going to make a frame for our door before we start coloring things in. So there are many ways we can do that. I could press Shift A and go add another cube and then try and make the frame out of that. Now I'm going to press X and delete that. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my door and go into edit mode. And I'm going to select faces again, so just this face here. And I'm going to press Shift D, which is duplicate. And then I'm going to press Y. And I can move this out a little bit. So you can see I've got this geometry on each side, which is fantastic. So now I can extrude again. I'm going to press E and move this out. Okay. Now, again, in the original picture, there are some kind of levels to this. So let's try and see if we can make that also apparent in this model here. So I'm going to press Control or I'm going to place my mouse over this top line here, this grey line, and it's going to cut a vertical strip in. And now I'm going to left click twice. I'm going to go back to face select this face here. I'm going to press extrude, and just by eye I'm just going to move it out a little bit. So now I've got this kind of step in. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our object mode. Now this is all fine, but it doesn't fix the top of my door. So I want to separate the door and the frame as two separate objects. So to do that, I'm going to go back to edit mode, and if I want to select all of the geometry just here but not in the door, I can select any face I want and then press the L key, and L is for linked. So select all linked geometry. And now to make these two separate objects, to split them, I can press P and go separate by selection. And now when I go back to object mode, the door and the frame are now two separate objects. So when I go into edit mode now, I'll only get the frame, or if I select the door and go into edit mode, I only have this piece here. These are two separate objects. So let's continue on with the frame for a moment. So I'm going to go into edit mode, and we're kind of limited, and if we want the frame to go over the top, it'll also have to go underneath the bottom because we have these modifiers on it. So I'm going to apply this modifier. Now if I try to apply it now, I'll get an error, and that's because I'm in edit mode. So I'm going to go to object mode and apply the mirror modifier. Now when I go into edit mode, this geometry is no longer a mirror, it's real. Now let's just check that we haven't got internal geometry here, and to do that we'll press Z and go wireframe. And you can see that I have three faces in here that I do not want. And I also have the same three faces inside here that I don't want. So I'm going to press X and faces. And now this is sort of like a hollow tube. So let's make a top to our door. So I'm going to select 1, 2, and 3. And the same 3 over here. 1, 2, and 3. So I've done that by holding down the Shift key and left clicking on the faces. I'm going to press 1 on my numpad, and I'm going to extrude this up by 0.1. So I'm going to go extrude and then 0.1, enter. Now I'm going to press Z and go back to solid mode. I would like that and that to be linked. Blender has a lovely tool that will let us do that. So I've selected both of those faces, and now I'm going to go up here to edge, and I'm going to click this tool here, bridge edge loop, and it's going to create a bridge between the two faces that I selected. That's fully 3D. So let's go back to object mode, and now we have a door and a frame. Now, in the original picture, let's click back here. I'll move this back. So we have our door. It has a handle, so we'll make that a very simple one in a moment. And it has hinges. And we can see it's got a gap here, and we've got a floor and a wall. So I'm not going to worry too much about the floor or the walls, but let's see if we can make ourselves a handle to start with. So we'll make a separate object for that. So I'm going to go Shift A, Add Mesh, Circle. Now, before I do anything else, I'm just going to open this little window here. So this only appears immediately after you've added the circle. If you go off and do other things and come back, you can't get this box to open up again. So we have to, if we want to make changes, we need to make them now. So the number of vertices, number of dots in this circle determines how smooth it is. So at the moment it's 32, so let's just make it 12. And now you can see it's less smooth because it's got 12 sides. If I brought it down to 3, we have a triangle. So a circle in Blender is just a triangle with lots of sides. So we're going to say 16 will be enough because we're going to make this quite small. But like I said, this is the only chance I get to amend or to change the number of vertices in the circle. So once I'm happy I've got the right number, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press S for scale. I'm going to say 0.1. So my circle is sort of stuck in the door. So let's go into wireframe mode. So I press Z on wireframe, and I'm going to press number 1 to look from the side, and I'm going to rotate this circle. I'm going to press OR 90 and enter. So I've rotated it 90 degrees. And now I want to move it forward so that it's level with the door. Let's just do that by I. So I'm going to press Z and go back into solid mode, turn my view, I'm going to press G and then X. And I'm just going to move my mouse until I see the circle. So there it is there. It's not going to be perfectly in line with the door, but we'll just try and have kind of park it just in front. So now I want to edit this circle, so I'm going to go into edit mode. Now at the moment, from the last thing we've done, we have face select, or face selection turned on. So what I actually want to be on is vertex selection. So I can select these individual vertices. So this is edge select, face select, and vertex select. So I'm going to press A, which is select all, and now I'm going to go extrude, which is E, on the x-axis. I've just moved my mouse, and now I'm going to left click. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to press E to extrude, and then I'm going to press S for scale. I'm going to move my mouse, and I'm making a smaller circle. And then I'm going to press E to extrude, and X to move along the x-axis. And then I'm going to press F for face. Now, I'm going to add a loop cut in here. So I'm going to press Control or and add in a loop cut. So I click once and the cut is added. Now I can still move my mouse, and I'm going to click about here. Now I've just moved it using my eye, not a particular number. I'm going to left click now. So what I want to do is I want to make sort of a handle from this. So I want a handle to come out to the side. So again, I'm going to go to face select and hold down the shift key and select these two. And I'm going to press E to extrude. Now I'm going to press 1 on my numpad. That brings me to the side. So number 3 on the numpad lets me look from the front. So now I'm going to press E again. You can see that I'm following this blue line. I'm following what's the tangent or the normal to the face is what I'm following, but I don't really want that. I want it to go out straighter. So I'm just going to left click, and then I'm going to press G, and just by eye I'm going to move this down. I'm going to press OR and rotate it a little bit. And that's all I'm really going to do now. I'm going to go back to object mode, and I'm going to press S to make this a little bit smaller, and then I'm going to press G and Y to move it over to there. Okay. So we have our door and our frame and our handle. Now they're all quite basic and quite simple, but you know, we're only starting out, so that's okay. So now I'm going to color them in a little bit. So let's just have a look at what they look like right now. So we're in the Eevee engine, which is, you know, there's a couple of them here that we can use. So Eevee's, for what we're doing now, is the best. If I click on this little icon here, it says rendered viewport shading. So I click on that, and so currently this is what our door looks like. So it's dark on this side, and that's because our lamp is over here. So let's click on the lamp and go G and move it down near to the door. I'm going to press 7, so I'm looking from above, and I can now move this lamp around the door. So I'm just going to press it or leave it somewhere in front of the door. Now you can see it's very bright. It's kind of too bright. So to change the intensity of this lamp, how bright it is, I can click on this little icon here, this little light bulb, and at the moment it says power at 1000, so we'll change that to say 50. And you can see immediately that it's not as overexposed, or it's not as bright as it once was. So now let's just color this in. Now we're not going to, I know you with Ross you did some UV unwrapping, we're not going to do that yet. I'm just going to select my doorway here, or my door, and I'm going to click on the material tab. Now it has a material, so I'm just going to rename it. I'm going to call it wood white. And so it's already white. So if I click on this little box here, I can change the color. So maybe we'll give it a slightly kind of orangey twinge to it, or a little orange take. Now I'm going to click on the frame, and I want to make a new, I want this to be slightly different. I don't want it to have that color. So to make a new material, I can click on this little icon here. Now by default it makes the new one, and it just takes the name off the last one and puts .001 on it. So we'll call this frame, and we'll make this white. So we'll bring this back to the center. So I'll bring up our hue, down our saturation. There we go. So now we've got a white frame and a slightly yellowy door. And now lastly I'm going to click on this handle here. Now I want to make something that's shiny, that's silver. So again, I can reuse one of the ones that we have, or I can click new, and I'm going to call this handle. And in this one, instead of changing the values here, we're going to look at this window. So I'm going to put my mouse here and drag this sideways, my mouse here and drag this down, and now I can kind of zoom in on this here. So what we were changing down here was the base color. So if I click here, I can make this a little more gray. And then I've got this specular slider here, which is kind of how, you know, it's kind of how shiny it is. It's more if you think of a piece of chrome or a toothpaste ad or something, and a pin kind of point of light that shines off the object as the light kind of bounces off the side of it. That's what specularity is. But this one here, this slider, is metallic. So I can actually turn this up and it will make this piece a lot shinier. And then maybe we'll click here and make it a little bit brighter. Now if we had an environment, if we had a sky or something like that, we would see the reflection of that on the door handle. Okay. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So I'm going to look through the camera. I'm going to press 0 on the numpad. And the camera is very far away. So it's not a great position for the camera to be in. So I'm going to fix that. So I'm going to move this back across. And I'm going to click on my tools here. And sorry, on view. And item, where are we? Yeah, this is what I'm looking for. So view. So this is the actual tool I'm looking for here. Lock camera to view. So over here, you'll notice in our outliner that we have a few other items. So we have door, and then we have door 001. So that's the frame. So we'll double click that and rename it frame. And then we have the circle. That's the handle. Okay. So what we're looking to do is move the camera. So I'm going to click camera here. So I've selected the camera. And now I can press G and move the camera, but it's not going to get me any closer to that door because I'm just kind of moving left, right, and up and down. But if I click this here, lock camera to view, and now I use the middle mouse wheel to zoom in, and I hold down the middle mouse button and I turn. So every time I navigate the 3D space, I'm repositioning the camera to also match that. And the thing to remember is when you're happy with its position, as I am now, is to turn it off. So now I can move off the camera and do other things. Okay, so this is now what the camera sees. So if I want to save this as a picture, I can now go render image, and this is what we have made. Now it's not very beautiful. It doesn't have a wooden texture. It doesn't look like it's painted. It doesn't have a lot of detail, but the purpose of doing this exercise is just to play with some of the tools, to toggle in and out of edit mode, to realize that there are modifiers that allow us to kind of shortcut a system where we're modeling. So if you're making, say, a human, you can maybe model one half of the human and mirror the other side. That we can have separate objects, that they all have to be the same object. That you can change the how smooth something is by increasing and decreasing the vertex count in it. And then the basic tools that we will use over and over again are scale, which is S, move, which is grab and the G key, and then several times we used E to extrude, and also control or, which is the loop cut when we want to add in an extra loop of geometry, which is a very handy tool when we're modeling. So that's all we're trying to make for now. If we get that completed in class, we'll be doing well. And if we don't get it finished in class, which we may well not, what I'd like you to do is watch this video and try and continue on and complete it at home. So that's all for now. Thank you.